Hi, today we're going to go ahead and start making a book, a journal. And there are actually two journals that go into our little box. There's the smaller one and then there's a larger one. And the smaller one, I've made a soft spine for it, and that's what we're going to do. It's just a little bit easier than making the hard spine, so we're going to start with the easy one. And then the bigger one has a hard spine. So let's go ahead and get everything we need out for our pages. You're going to need 2 pieces of chipboard, and I'm making this one a little bit bigger than the original one that came with that, the instructions came with that box. You need 2 pieces that are 5.5 by 6 inches. And then if you have some fabric, that makes your spine just a little bit nicer. You can see this is, not only is it cardstock, but then I went ahead and covered the cardstock with a fabric. There's cardstock in here for my spine for this, and then the fabric covers it just a little bit. Okay, so chipboard fabric. You're going to need a couple more pieces of chipboard cut to make the spine, and I'll give you the measurements for that in just a minute. And then we're going to make some signatures, and depending on how long this takes us, we'll see how we get through today. Okay, so I have my cut and scoreboard. So when you look at your cover, we know that this is 5.5 inches wide by 6 inches tall. So when you do the spine, you want the spine to be as tall, the outside spine, there are two pieces of spine. The outside spine is going to be as tall as this is, so it's going to be 6 inches. And let me get my pattern. I've already drawn out my pattern. So we want this piece, this is the inner spine. It's 3 inches wide. The outer spine you want to be about 4 inches wide. So let's go ahead and cut our outer spine. We'll work on our outer spine first, and then we'll work on our inner spine. So we want it 4 inches wide. Okay, and then we want it, this is the outer spine, so we want it exactly 6 inches. I have to open this. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and get some fabric if you have some. And I am placing my fabric like this. You probably want to go ahead and score this. So let me tell you how big we need to score that. You need to do about 1.5 inches. So let's go ahead and score. This is 4 inches, so I want my 1.5 inches to be at 1 1/4 and 2 3/4. Let's see, 1 1/4. Yeah, so 2 3/4 should pretty much do it. Let's look at that. Yeah, I've drawn lines to show us where we're going to put our sewing. So we want it just a little bit on either side of that. So go ahead and fold that. And then I'm going to go ahead and burnish mine. Okay, that looks good. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make it just a little bit bigger, and you'll want to do something like that, maybe about 1 inch on each side. So let me get my scissors, and I'm going to cut. It's a little bit more than an inch, but that's okay. So I want my folded parts to be up, and we are going to glue this in here now. You can iron this if you want to, but I'm just going to go ahead and glue this entire piece down. And you've probably seen older books that have fabric spines. Some of our newer creative books are harder spines. Okay, so I'm going to lay that down. And I'm just going to pull on my fabric rather than iron it. And there we go. So then I'm going to go ahead and burnish this pretty well. You can use other glues. I have a tacky glue, a tacky book glue, and that will work too. So I'm going to trim up some of this because it's not really, it doesn't have to be that much. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to glue this fabric. Eileen's fabric glue would work really well on this too, because it holds fabric very well. This our glitter glue will do well too. And you can see I'm putting just a little bit extra glue on the paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and make sure my edge is straight and then push. Now your glue's going to come out a little bit on the fabric, but that's all right. And then I'm going to burnish. And I'm pushing just one way. I'm not rubbing back and forth. I'm pushing so that my edges don't get deformed. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to set this aside and let it dry. That's part of what I really like about this silicone mat that I work on. If I get glue on it, it's very easy to clean it up. And the glue is coming through the fabric, which it would. And so then once it gets on my silicone mat, all I have to do is pretty much wipe it. Okay, there we go. And let's go ahead and burnish that down too. So while we have it just a little bit wet, I'm taking the soft side of my bone folder and I'm going to round this by rolling it across there. And you can see it's kind of rounded my spine just a little bit. You don't have to go past your score lines because those will be flat on the chipboard, but you want your little spine to be just a little bit flexible. Like that. Okay, let's put this aside because the next thing we're going to create is we're going to make the inner spine. Now, the inner spine needs to be 3 inches across, so let's go ahead and cut that first. Let me put my pin in my glue. So I want to cut one, let's see how deep that is. Oh, that was perfect. So I want to cut one at 3 inches. 3 inches wide. And I want it to be just about 1/8 of an inch shorter than my 6 inches. So I'm going to bring it down to 5 7/8 tall. Now I'm going to show this to you on white paper. So we want to put 7 holes. We want 3 rows because we're going to use 3 signatures. These are called signatures. These are your pages in your book. They're called signatures. And we're going to make 3 of those in just a little while. So what we want to do is you want to take your ruler, and we want this just about 7/8 inch in from this side, from the right side and the left side. And you want one exactly in the middle. So basically what I would do is I would find the middle one first, which is, for me, it's 1.5. So I'm going to mark that. I'm going to leave this out here so you can see it, because it's easier on the white, I think, for you to see this. So let's go ahead and mark this at 1.5. And then I'm going to connect those. Okay. And then the next thing is we want to put another row right along it. Now we're marking the tall edge from the tall top to the bottom. Let me get rid of that so it doesn't confuse us. So the next thing I want to do is I want this to be 3/4 inch between the outside edges. So I'm going to mark this at 3¼ which that is that 3¼ or is that a half? That's a 1/2 inch, I'm sorry. So mark this a 1/2 inch on the right side and a 1/2 inch on the left side. Ooh, yeah, it's gonna move. I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and do that again. Okay, so those are where our signatures are going to be sewn. We will put one on this one in the middle, and one on the far left. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to figure out where we are going to place our holes for our sewing, and we know we want 7 holes. So I've already done the math for us. We want to put one at a 1/2 inch from the bottom. And then we want 3/4 inch. And another 3/4 inch. Oh, it's moving. The paper's so slick, it's moving. Okay, and then a 1/2 inch. Now, that should be about, not quite. So let's start at the other top then, and we're going to start with a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 3/4 inch, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I did the math. It's really strange. Okay. I'm going to go on the other side. It's not quite right. So I'm going to show you the other way, and this should be better. So I'm going to mark 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, and I'm going to connect it. And that should have worked. Okay, so then we put a 1/2 inch on each side. Okay, so the other way, which probably is easier for us, is to mark our middle line. And we want to do halfway through. So that will be, since we took off a 1/7 inch, I'm trying to center it. And I'm going to put my 3 here, and I want a 1/2 here. So I'm going to do a 1/2 inch on either side of my middle, and then 3/4, and then another 3/4, okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. Okay, so let me look at that, make sure. Oh yeah, that'll be just about right. So I'm going to go ahead and line these up and draw a line across each one. So, let me show you on the white piece. We're going to need our awl, and everywhere, we're not going to do these ones, but everywhere you've drawn a line, we're going to put a hole. So on each of these lines, you're going to have 7 holes where the line crosses. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm just using my, I probably don't even need my magic board. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So the next thing you want to do is you'll want to score this. And I'm thinking, what did we do? 1.5 inches in the center? Yeah. So we want to make it just a little bit. I'm going to mark this at okay. So I'm marking it so that there's about 1/4 inch on either side of my last 2 completely drawn lines, and I'm going to score. Let's see. Yeah, we can score that one, and we can score that one. Okay, so that's pretty much, that will fit inside of there. Okay, perfect. All right, so you're going to need some floss, and I just use embroidery floss. I do have some waxed thread that you can use. So if you have embroidery floss, go ahead and find that, and find a color that matches. And I think I might use, since I'm using, I might use, I think that green would look good. And get yourself a needle. You're going to need a needle so that you can sew. That's not a needle, there are my needles. Okay, so get yourself a little bit of thread. I pretty much like to measure it, and the way you can measure it is, I should have had that on a bobbin, that's all right, is I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, I'm going to do 5 because I'm making 7 holes. So I've cut myself, it's a little bit longer than a yard. So when you look at embroidery thread, there are 6 pieces of thread in one piece of embroidery thread. So I'm going to take 3 of those. So I'm going to cut it in half. Set this one aside. And I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle, which this is probably the hardest part. And I know I don't need it, but I am going to put just a little bit of a knot in one end. Now, we don't want to pull this completely through. So go ahead and set that aside and take one of your signatures. Now, I'm going to tell you the spaces on your signatures. Some of you, I made a coloring book for a little girl that I know, so mine's going to be a little bit different than yours. But my pages, I cut them at about 10 inches by 5.5. And this is quite heavy paper. It's coloring paper, so I only have 1, 2, 3. I have about 5 pieces in here. When you look at this book, this is done on 32-pound paper, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could do 6 or 7 if you're doing a thinner paper. Okay, so once you've done that, then you go ahead and you score them in the middle. You lay them down, and what you'll find is the papers are not even because each one is starting to come out just a little bit. So I basically take a ruler and I put it on the first line that is straight, and then I will take an X-Acto knife and I will cut until I've cut through all of those pages. And then I have a signature. So in order to mark your signatures, I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to try to put this on the line. Actually, it might be better if we do it this way. And so I'm going to go ahead and this black piece is a little bit bigger than my white signatures. So I'm just trying to get it kind of centered. Then on my line, I'm going to follow this line where I've poked my hole, and I'm going to go ahead and poke. Poke. As I'm doing this, I'm kind of watching because they're not exactly on the lines. As you can see, some of them are a little bit to one side. So I want to kind of make sure I poke a little bit to one side of my line. So then the other thing I will do is I will go ahead and you can pretty much see through those. Yep, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure those holes go the whole way through. Now, if you're interested in bookbinding, there are a lot of different sewing techniques that you can do on a spine. This is just one of them, and it's nothing really fancy. It's just a basic up down sew. There are some that make little knots as they go along, and if you look up bookbinding, sewing the spine of bookbinding, something to that effect, you'll find that. Okay, so we have one of these done. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this in to show you, and then you can come back to this spot to do the other spines, the other signatures if you like. So what I do is I find the exact center hole, and I'm going to go, and I'm using the middle one for myself. So I'm going to pull that through, and I'm going to leave myself a little bit of a tail. Now, if you want to use masking tape or some easy tape that won't rip, you can. I'm not going to do that. And so the next one I find on my signature is the middle hole, and I sew through that. I pull through that. And I don't pull it terribly tight. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go up, down, up, down. So I want to go down on this one, and I will come through the signatures, and then I'll find the hole for my spine. Okay, so we have one. So then you're going to go back here, and you're going to find the next hole in line. You're going to go through that, and then through the signatures. Now, pull it just a little bit taut. And then we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to go through the last holes on the signatures. And through the last hole on our spine. Okay. And then we're going to do the same thing coming back. We're on the back side, we're going to go through the next hole. And you can see now we have thread. Now, once we get to the one before the middle, we're going to skip. We're not going to go through the middle one. We're going to skip to the one on the other side of where we originally started our thread. We're going to skip. And this is being a little bit of a took. There we go. So this has a long spread. Okay. And I want you to notice my tail is on one side of that thread. And that's going to be important because as we come back and we finish, we're going to show you that we want to make it the other side. So then I'm going to go up, down again. Okay, so I have a skip there, and I have two skips here. So I'm going to go ahead and do it again on this side. And I'm starting to pull, not terribly tight. Don't pull them terribly tight or you'll rip your paper. And then I'm going to go up. And this one was a stinker, wasn't it? I must not have gotten them in line. Now, what I want you to do is so my thread is on this side of that line that we went completely across. So I'm going to pull this away from my hole so that when I put my needle and my thread through it, I have one on either side of that string that's going this way. There's one on this side and one on this side. Now I'm going to tie those, and if you know what a surgeon's knot is, that's pretty much what I use. But a surgeon's knot is you tie it once, and then you flip it and tie it you wrap your thread once through as if you're making a knot, but you don't pull it, and then take your tail and wrap it through that space again so that you've actually wrapped that twice. That didn't go through. There we go. And then pull it. Now, sometimes I'll go through and make a third knot, just a regular knot. And you can cut these. Don't cut them terribly short because we will glue them. Yeah, there you go. And if you're going to do the others sides right now, then you don't want to glue this, but when you're finished with all three of them, you want to put a little bead of glue and just kind of guide that thread through that bead of glue so that it stays in place. There we go. And that's all there is to sewing signatures. Now, what you'll do is you'll do the exact same thing with the others. And I would suggest that you go ahead and rewind this video to where we go ahead. I don't think that's going to be long. You might try it, but I don't know if it's going to be long enough. If it's not long enough, you'll have to pull it all out and start with your larger thread. But you do have two of these. You have another long one. So go ahead and put all of your signatures in. Like I said, rewind, but you have a nice line of sewing, which is way cool. The one thing you will want to try and remember, since I have coloring pages, I want to remember which side is up so that when I put my next signature in, I sew it so that all of my tops are tops and my bottoms are bottoms. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been a little lengthy, but you've learned a lot. And again, you can always come back to this to redo signatures. Anything that you have to redo, you can come back and do it again. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed working with you. I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.